Okay, folks, it's 28th of July 2024. It's about 9:30 in the evening UK time. I'm doing this because you asked. Okay, this is the horoscope of Robert F. Kennedy Junior, born on the 17th of January 1954. He was born in Washington, D.C., and I do have a birth time for him. That birth time is 5:32 p.m. There is no anecdoted source for this birth time except that it comes from someone called Matthew Swan, Swann. I found 3 or 4 Matthew Swans on the internet. I don't know who he is or how this birth time came about, so I cannot be sure of it. Nevertheless, it's out there, so it's the birth time I'm using. RFK Junior is a very controversial character. He's quite a checkered character. He's been married at least twice, maybe 3 times. One of his wives killed herself, ex-wives killed herself. Allegedly, she found a diary containing a large number of his affairs. He's been busted for cannabis, which I say big deal. Who hasn't in this day and age? He's also got arrested for heroin possession long ago, and he got 2 years probation. He's a very strong environmentalist. He's a lawyer, and he's a propagator of a large number of what other people might call conspiracy theories, particularly around COVID-19 vaccines. He's also the nephew of the Kennedy family of JFK. He's the son of RFK, and he's also an independent candidate for President of the United States, and he's achieving a lot of traction. He was being funded by a lot of people who are supporting Donald Trump in an effort to get votes to go to Kennedy to deflect them from Joe Biden, but that is now no longer the case. All of this information that I found out comes from places like Wikipedia, New York Times, CNN, BBC, cross-board. I don't know if any of it's true. I just know what the astrology says. And the astrology here is that Kennedy is a Capricorn with the moon in Cancer and Leo rising. And there are a number of challenging aspects in his chart. Firstly, he was born the day before the full moon. He was born with Venus opposite Uranus, which is an interesting aspect when it comes to affairs of the heart and romanticism. It makes him someone who has difficulty staying the pace in long-term, committed, normal, routine, boring, stable relationships. He also has Venus precisely 0 minutes, 0 degrees, exactly in conjunct Pluto, suggesting that at heart, in his soul, that there's an element of the tortured one, especially around his relationships with women. And I do feel that he has both tried to control women and has been controlled by women. However, being the age he is, he's the same age as me, give or take 18 months. He's 70 now, so I imagine he's grown up a bit, one would hope. He was also born with the Sun square Neptune. A lot of famous musicians, artists like Paul McCartney, Lady Gaga, they're born with a Sun square Neptune. But fantasy stays between the ears. The imagination can be created. I dispute some of RFK's ideas around the conspiracy theories. He, by his own admission, has had all 6 of his children vaccinated. I'm not quite sure what against, but I know his children have had vaccines. He said he's not anti any particular vaccine, he just wants the quality of vaccines to be better. He has gone for a number of people accusing a lot of people of making a large amount of money out of COVID. That may or may not be true. I don't know. But with the Sun square Neptune, to quote Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and all the people players, and that makes him his own kind of casting director in his own movie. And with the Sun square Neptune, Venus in conjunct Pluto, and Venus opposite Uranus, it would be easy to label him as a fantasist, as someone who's a dreamer, who sees the world as being the way he wants it to be rather than dealing with it the way it really is. However, these are the challenging aspects in his chart. There's also the not insignificant matter that RFK Junior, if his time of birth is correct, was born with Uranus strongly square the midheaven, making him much more of a maverick, making him rubbish at taking orders and giving him a somewhat radical, innovative, revolutionary and futuristic way of seeing the world, particularly the role of governments and the role of structures in the world. He's quite a libertarian. But I've concentrated on the challenges. So let's look at some of the positives here. And there are a number of positives. There's a weak trine from Saturn to the Moon, suggesting that whilst with that Moon in Cancer, he does have a strong emotional streak, and at times he can be quite temperamental or moody, but nevertheless, when the proverbial hits the fan and everyone else is doing the headless chicken, he's quite likely to go ice cold, solid, and make yes, no, black and white on the spot decisions that are probably going to be the right ones. He also has a nice trine from Mars to the Moon. He has both Mars and Saturn in Scorpio, and still waters run deep with this. And with both Mars and Saturn trining the Moon in Cancer, this does give him a strongly held emotional sense of what is right and what is wrong. He is, by his own admission, quite a strong Catholic. There's also a lovely sextile from Jupiter to the midheaven. Jupiter in Gemini, sextile the midheaven in Aries, which does give him an external persona of popularity, cheerfulness, optimism, hope, futurism, great media, glass more than half full. When I look at the transits of his chart, I'm not looking at the progressions, I'm looking at more what's happening to him in the outside world rather than looking at what's happening to him internally. Pluto has spent the last 2 years conjuncting his Sun. And when he declared his intention to stand for president last year in 2023, he said the first thing he did was cleared it with his wife. That was while Pluto was on his Sun. Pluto has now finished with his Sun. It is now just finished with his Mercury also. It's interesting that next year this year also, and next year, Pluto is passing opposite his ascendant in early Leo. So there are going to be very big changes in his life. I do think that RFK Junior swings more towards the left wing, more liberal wing rather than the right wing. He's certainly a very strong environmentalist and has a deep passion to work with environmental concerns across the board. So Pluto is going to pass opposite his ascendant. Neptune this year is currently sextiling both just finished sextiling his Sun, but it's sextiling his Mercury. And this is affecting his thinking in a positive way. It is perhaps bringing him into a more empathic, sensitive, receptive. He's listening to a lot of people. It could make him easily influenced, but I think more likely it's making him more sensitive to the state of the planet. And it's really boosting his environmental credentials. This year, and through to early next year, Uranus in the sky is trining his Venus. Nice enough. Next year, Uranus will be trining his Sun, which is lovely. bringing a lot of interesting opportunities for in his role. And if he doesn't become president, then he's obviously going to move on and become someone big on the world stage. And I might expect some type of job with various non-governmental organisations, NGOs, or the World Health Organization, or something like this. With Uranus trining his sun, he's going to become a figurehead in the global community over the next year and a half, regardless of what position he holds. I note that not only is Uranus trining his sun next year, but Saturn is also sextiling his sun next year. So it does seem that he's on the up. Now, as we speak, Saturn is trining his Mars, and next year it's sextiling his Sun and his Mercury. It's also trining his Moon this year. So Saturn's very much being his friend over the next couple of years. But here's the clincher. RFK was born with Jupiter in Gemini sextile his midheaven, and in the very short-term future, by which I'm in the next month, next 4 to 6 weeks, Jupiter in the sky is going to land on top of his Jupiter and sextile his midheaven, and then it's going to stay there until early next year. So I do expect him to get big pulls in popularity, big swings towards him. And with Jupiter doing wonderful things in his chart, and Saturn and Uranus being his friend over this next year and a half, I think his star is definitely in the ascendant. I think he's going to go on and do big things. I think he has the potential to make a big difference in the lives of a large number of people over the coming year and a half to 2 years. Do I think he'll become president? No. I think the political system is stacked against him, and there are a lot of skeletons in his cupboard, which people will seize upon, because American politics is not nice. But I do think he has a tremendous potential to influence the outcome of the election. And whichever party attempts to woo him and bring him on board, if they can, will probably win. Because anyone who offers him a job, such as Secretary of the Interior, Secretary for the Environment, Health Secretary, anything like this, is probably going to influence him very favourably. And over the next 2 to 2.5 years, I think he's going to make a very big difference in the lives of a large amount of people, for the positive. However, underlying all this, whilst the next couple of years may be very favourable for him, and there is nothing negative about him over the coming 4 or 5 years as far as I can see. I think the guy's a bit gifted, to be honest. I think he's got a charmed life. But the underlying themes in his horoscope, at a basic level, Venus exactly in conjunct Pluto, the Sun strongly square Neptune. I suspect that at his core he doubts himself. And the fact that he is religious makes me doubt him, because most people who are religious are seeking some type of external form of faith or relationship with the divine, as imposed by priests, old men in skirts, the corporate, the religious, as opposed to finding that faith inside oneself, having one's own relationship with spirit, which of course anybody who studies astrology seriously does develop, and frees himself from the yoke of imposed indoctrination. And I do feel that he doubts himself at a core level, and as a result I can't see him winning the election. I can't see him getting enough votes to actually become the President of America. But I can see him being a very powerful figure, in whichever administration would reach out to him and offer him the right job. and then he could be a very good force for good. Let's hope so, because overall I prefer to think the best of people, not the worst. He's got a role to play, and it's going to be very interesting over the coming years to see what he does. Watch this space.